This is a common cast gents ring to set 2 stones in using the little beads or prong to make it look like it's Bead and Bright cut setting. These little pinpoint looking beads is what give this style of setting its name. We are going to set 2 Podparaja sapphires in this ring. To begin, take an onglet graver to clean up the sides from the rough casting. It is easier to get this rough surface off now than after the stones are set. Also, clean up the metal around the beads to make it easier to set. Next, lay the stones on top of the mounting to make sure that they'll fit and that the stones will not overlap each other. We then measure the stone's diameter. This one is 4.86 millimeters, and the other one is a little larger, about 1/10 of a millimeter difference in the stones. Then take a straight-sided setting burr and select a burr that is just a bit smaller than the diameter of the stones. Because these colored stones have a deep pavilion, we begin by cutting with a bud burr. We want to cut out the bulk of the metal so that we do less cutting with our precise stone setting burr, and we also open up the bottom to make room for the pavilion. Next, take the straight-sided setting burr that we selected and cut straight down into the prongs to cut our seat. Cut down to the depth we want the stones to set. Because the burr is a little bit smaller than the actual size of the stones, we need to move the burr around in a circular motion, cutting into each prong just a little bit further. Then take the stones and test fit them into the mounting. Test the stone in each side to see which side the stone fits better, and if they go down all the way into the seat. Here we can see that the stone actually fits the diameter we cut for the seat, but they're not going down deep enough into the mounting because the pavilion is hitting on some of the metal below the girdle of the stone. So we use the bud burr again to cut some of the metal out below the girdle of the stone. We do not want to cut any of the metal on the prongs. We just want to cut below the seat, below the girdle of the stone for the pavilion to fit. Use a little brush to clean out any metal filings that the burr created, so we have a nice clean seat to test fit the stones. This is just trial and error. Cut a little bit and then fit the stones, cut a little more and refit the stones until we get the stones to fit the seat. We want the stones to fit nice and low with the girdle of the stone just above the metal plate. This is a man's ring and it's going to be worn on his little finger, so we want the stones to set fairly low to protect them from the abuse they'll receive while worn. Next, we begin the setting process. Slide a number 42 flat graver down the side of the bright cut, using the angle of the graver to push the bead out over the stone. On the center prongs, work the graver down in between the beads, spreading them out over the stone. Turn the mounting around and do the same on the other side. We do not want to push these beads all the way down. We're just starting to bend them over. Next, we go in the corner and do the same for each of the corner beads. Just start pushing them over the stones. We do not want to push all the way down tight on the stone because that may dislodge the stone and set it crooked. Now that the prongs are over the stone a little bit, we change to this round bottom graver. With the round bottom graver, you can stick the point of the graver down at the base of the bead and then proceed to push the prong farther over the stone and you won't slip off. With the flat graver, it's easier to slip when you're starting to push over this far. With the flat graver, we just use the angle of the graver to force the beads down. Now we are actually pushing down on the prong, and so we change to this round bottom graver because it's easier to control with the point of the graver embedded in the metal. Push each prong down a little bit at a time and keep working our way around the mounting, pushing the prongs down evenly so that the stone will remain straight. Push down the final time on each prong until the prong is down tight on the crown of the stone so that there is no gap that can catch while the ring is being worn. We then use our tweezers to check and make sure the stones are tight and that there's no movement of the stones. Then take a triangular needle file that has a safety edge polished on the edges and file the bead back a little bit as they're just a little bit long. We left them long at the beginning to give us a little more leverage while we're pushing them down. If the beads are short, you have to push harder and it's easier to slip and damage the stones. With the longer prong, it's easier to control your pushing and you have a little more leverage so you don't have to use as much force. But now we need to trim them back to the proper size and make sure they're all the same length. I like the prongs on this size stone to be not quite half the way up the crown, not quite half the distance from the girdle to the table of the stone. That gives a nice size to the beads. They're heavy enough to hold the stone even with some wear and abuse to the ring, but not so big that it's distracting from the stone. When setting stones, you need to keep a balance between showing the stone with the most beauty and color and the issue of security. You don't want the customer to lose the stone while they're wearing it, and so the beads need to be heavy enough so that it's secure, but small enough to show the stone in the best possible manner. Next, take a flat graver and go around the prong and trim off any flashing that is left out over the stone from the filing of the prongs. Next, use a cut burr or concave cutter and go over each of the beads with the same burr. This does two things. By using the same burr on each bead, we are assured that each bead will be the same size and uniform in size and shape. And second, it rounds the bead, giving them a nice clean look and makes them smooth so that they won't catch on clothing while the ring is worn. Go around the ring, going over each of the beads with the cut burr. Then go back to the flat graver and trim off any flashing of metal that is left over the stone caused by the cut burr. Trim the flashing off of each of the prongs. Then we use the flat graver to start our bright cut. We cleaned up any roughness from the casting off the sides before we set the stones, but now we need to go back and using nice long smooth strokes, trim the metal so we have a nice flat shiny surface from the top of the mounting down to the stone. We need to even up the sides, taking out any marks that the gravers left from pushing the beads over the stone. Make sure it's nice and smooth and even all the way around, and that it's a nice rectangular shape surrounding the stones. Continue to cut around the mounting using nice smooth strokes. You don't want to cut too deep. If you need to remove more metal, it is better to do it in several passes, taking a little bit off each time than trying to cut deep. It's easier to control how much metal you remove that way. In the center here, you need to cut down between the prongs so that the flat surface continues down all the way to the base of the prong, even in between the two of them. You want to cut this holding the graver at the same angle so that you make a nice even cut on the same angle all the way around. In the corners, come down to the prong to clean out the corner and continue the cutting across the end of the mounting as well. I then like to take an onglet graver and just go back over it because some places, especially along the girdles of the stone and in between the center prongs, it's easier to cut with the onglet graver. Use the side of the onglet graver to cut on the face of the bright cut. Just go over it once or twice on each side, making sure it's a nice smooth straight cut on all four sides. Then I cut in between the beads to make sure that's nice and clean and that there's no little metal burrs left in between. Then take some rouge on a bristle brush and go over the top of the mounting and clean everything up. Some stone setters who do this every day can make the bright cut so polished with their gravers that polishing with a bristle brush would detract from it. However, the average bench jeweler needs to go over it with a bristle brush and polish the beads and also the bright cutting. Next, use an emery stick to remove any of the scratches on the side of the ring that was caused by pushing so hard on the bench pin and any tool slips. Then use a hard felt wheel on the flex shaft to remove all the marks from the emery stick. The hard felt wheel gives you a nice flat polished surface and won't round off the edges. This gives a nice contrast between the polished sides of the ring and the textured surface on the top. After a final buffing and cleaning in the ultrasonic, the ring is now finished and ready to deliver to our customer. Here's the final shot of the ring being worn by the customer, a very nice Pad sapphire ring in a gent's pinpoint mounting.